Hi everyone, and welcome to another video tutorial for our Mr. Huskin's World History class. Today we're going to be continuing our look at our Introduction to Culture, our Culture mini-unit, and we're going to be taking a little bit of a look at the study of anthropology. Now there are many different, I guess you could say, careers that involve the 7 elements of culture and studying of different cultures around the world. Anthropology is the one that we kind of are going to use the most commonly in class. And so I want to give you guys kind of a little bit of an overview, a little bit of the history, a little bit of an overview of the practices that go into this study, and sort of what goes into making it tick. And so let's get started and let's take a look at what anthropology is all about. For the last couple class periods, we've been doing activities looking at the visual elements of culture that we can see, that we can easily identify, and obviously there are a few examples here that we looked at in class. Oftentimes, though, when scientists, historians, cultural experts are studying culture, you don't always have such a black and white style of looking at culture. There are a lot of unseen elements. There are elements that can't necessarily be just visualized on the surface. And so a lot of times we need to come up with ways, practices, procedures to go about actually finding out all of the different elements of culture and what makes a society tick. And that's kind of where, the study of anthropology comes in. These are professionals, these are individuals who have been trained to not only use the 7 elements of culture, but have kind of the ability to propose theories and draw conclusions based on that evidence and what they find out. So we'll look at some of the styles of anthropology, we'll look at some of the methods, and we'll also look at a little bit of the history as well. We'll start off kind of basically. What is anthropology? A definition that we're going to use in class: anthropology is the study of mankind and how we have developed. And a lot of times when we use that terminology, the trick I always tell my students is a lot of times a trick question on a test or a quiz will be, anthropology is the study of what? And one of the options I always give is the study of culture. And 9 times out of 10 I have students who will pick that answer. Anthropology, technically, if we're being very specific, is not just the study of culture, it's the study of mankind and how we have developed or changed over the years. So don't be the person to fall into that trap. There's a big emphasis on research and observation. So if you're somebody who doesn't enjoy spending time in a library or kind of working by yourself, this probably isn't the career for you. Some of the types of anthropology that we may come across or you may see out there: physical anthropology, also known as biological anthropology. If any of you guys are fans of the series Bones, the main character in that series is a physical anthropologist, and they mainly study bones and human remains. Cultural anthropologists kind of use exclusively the 7 elements of culture and are really the ones we see kind of in those Discovery Channel documentaries, who are like living among the people and kind of really getting to the root of what makes their culture tick. Linguistic anthropology is obviously the study of language and sort of how language has developed over the years. And then, of course, the one that kind of gets the most Hollywood publicity is archaeology, and this is where a lot of times some of my students start saying, oh, so you're saying like Indiana Jones is an anthropologist. Well, to a certain extent, that's correct. But I can tell you from my own experience that don't get suckered in by, the Harrison Ford on the screen and real-life anthropology. Real anthropology is not always that exciting. So when you look at kind of Hollywood's version of anthropology, your Harrison Fords, your Nicolas Cages from National Treasure, your characters from like Jurassic Park, on the surface, they are anthropologists, but in the grand scheme of what actually they're doing and how adventurous and how kind of glamorous their life is, that's not really what we're talking about. So we won't really make too many references to these guys, but they are kind of the public's perception of what an anthropologist does, shooting off to exotic locations and having great adventures. That's not always the key. When we look at kind of where and when did anthropology develop, anthropology is a relatively new science. It's only been around for about a little over 100 years, and mainly that's because it started to develop in Europe, particularly Great Britain. During the 1800s, particularly the mid to late 1800s, is when we started to see anthropology really start to come into its own. And a lot of that had to do with what was going on during that period of European history, particularly the great advances of the Industrial Revolution in science and technology, and people wanting to use that to sort of find out where they were from, kind of answer some of these big questions that had originally been done through religion, and now we're kind of moving into the realm of science. The other thing that's going to spur kind of curiosity in anthropology, or the basis of anthropology, is the publication of the incredibly controversial book by Charles Darwin and sort of the presenting of his theory of evolution. That's going to spur people to start asking questions about, even more, where did we come from, and can we definitively prove it through archaeological evidence or by other means? And you're going to see from this period, we're going to have modern practices, techniques, and technologies start to develop. And you can see on this slide, up there in the upper corner, you can see kind of an original anthropologist, someone who Charles Darwin in his time, the 1850s, 1860s, would have been the quintessential anthropologist, and then sort of the today version below that of what a modern-day anthropologist kind of more resembles. So it's going to be kind of the scientific revolution, the industrial revolution, these great advances in science and technology that comes out of the mid-1800s to late 19th century. That's where we really see kind of the beginnings of anthropology. And then, of course, Charles Darwin and his controversial theories on evolution and science that are going to be published. That's really going to be what kind of really sparks interest in sort of figuring out, or in a lot of cases, disproving what Darwin was talking about. And that's a debate that continues to go on today. As an interesting little side note, some of you guys may know that Darwin, in his famous publication, gives credit to actually a local scientist of note here in E-Town, and that's Samuel Haldeman, who actually lived in Bainbridge. And he actually wrote a very influential paper in the Journal of Natural History, which Darwin cites. It's one of the few citations in Darwin's original work, and it's as a local scientist. Today, his home is a National Historic Site. You can actually take tours of it. It's actually been popping up in the news quite recently because of people going there to do ghost tours and also to look for paranormal activity, so if you're into that. But kind of my area where I live, Marietta, we also have a little bit of history with Haldeman, which if you're familiar with Chickies Rock, there used to be a big mansion there that Haldeman used as kind of his base of operations, both as a professor at Penn and at other places, but also doing his own scientific work and lectures and writings and things like that. And of course, that mansion doesn't exist there anymore. But his home in Bainbridge, where he was born and where his family lived and where he grew up, has actually become a National Historic Site. So kind of a little-known fact about, this aspect of history, along with kind of a local flair as well. To get back to kind of the topic that we're specifically focused in on, how do we study anthropology? What's the process that anthropologists follow? For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to boil down some of these steps, and for any of you guys who go into college and take an anthropology class, you'll probably get very more specific and a lot more in-depth as far as these. But typically in the anthropological method, which is the code name that we're going to use this semester, very similar to the scientific method that you guys have known since elementary school, but the methods itself are kind of shortened down. We're actually going to focus on 4 steps in the anthropological method. Observation, which is usually kind of the beginnings of investigation. If you're an archaeologist, you look at the artifact and you try to give detailed notes, detailed descriptions. In some cases, you might even sketch out what the artifact is and kind of taking in every piece of evidence that might be presented there. If you're a cultural anthropologist, just observing and sort of looking at different items with that, and so on and so forth. Hypothesis, obviously, is making your educated guess and presenting what you'd like to prove or disprove. Research, interact, that's where we head to the libraries, we start doing our research, we start doing our further investigating, or you start to interact with the culture, society you're studying. And then, of course, drawing your conclusion, which is basically based on the evidence you had in the last step, what's going to be the final result that you come up with or that you present. This, in a nutshell, guys, is what we're going to be looking at with anthropology. And so, again, kind of a short tutorial, but hopefully you found it informative, interesting, and we'll see you again next time.